Thanks, Rich, and it's great to be with you this morning, and we're dealing with this theme of love God, love people, live the question. One of the ways we love God and love people is by living questions when people struggle with faith, when they struggle with doubt, when they struggle with the problem of evil and suffering in their lives. Sometimes it's best not to actually say to people, here's the solution from Scripture. Sometimes we do need to share from Scripture in people's struggles what the solution is to their crisis. But if Job's friends had only listened, back when I was in seminary school, I went through a major struggle in my own Christian faith, my own Christian walk. And I said to a mentor of mine, I said, I am not going to challenge God or struggle with God over this. I'm going to love God and just deal with it. And he said, if you really love God, wrestle with God, Paul. Wrestle with God. Don't just sit there with this. Struggle with God. Be honest with God in the midst of your doubts and frustrations and the like. And so living the question is a key part, in my estimation, of living the Christian life. Loving God, loving people involves living the question. And this week we're going to have a variety of speakers engaging biblically, existentially, life stories overseas, and here dealing with such matters as their own personal struggles, racial struggles, all kinds of struggles in our society, ethnic cleansing overseas. But we wanted to start out today with Tony Kriz sharing. I've known Tony for years. We go back to 2001 or so? 2000. Had the privilege of having Tony in seminary classes. He's a graduate here, OSU, and George Fox, author of numerous books, writes for Leadership Journal, and also is the author of Aloof and Neighbors and Wise Men. He's spoken here many times. I have found Tony to be one of the best provocateurs in really living questions. And he lifts up people's thinking and hearts and imaginations by helping us live questions well, even on this subject of love God, love people, live the question. Tony, please share with us this morning. Thank you.
All right. All right. You guys hear me okay? I have a nephew named John Athanasius Hardesty. We call him Athan. He has two brothers, James Ambrose and Ransom Thomas Aquinas Hardesty. I'm not making this up. This tells you a little bit about my sister. Athan's youngest brother, Ransom, when he was 3 years old, was inflicted with cancer. 3 years old. An insidious form of cancer, like a belch from the bowels of hell on his body, ravaged him. And I'm the uncle. Part of my job as the uncle was to care for Athan while his little brother suffered. It's easy to forget the other kids when one child is suffering in such an insidious way. My nephew Athan lives in Oklahoma, outside of Oklahoma City. Big basketball fan, big NBA fan. And so I was flying down every couple of months to go see him and Ambrose, his brother, and to sort of give them attention was sort of my goal. And before this one trip, I thought, what can I do for Athan? What would be a way to just make him feel like the most special kid on the planet? My wife and I were broke. Barely enough for a plane ticket. But I thought to myself, it would be great. Take Athan to an Oklahoma City Thunder game while I'm down there. Loves basketball, loves the NBA. So I jump online, and guess who the Thunder are playing that weekend in Oklahoma City? Our Portland Trailblazers. And I got a lot of friends in the sports community here in Portland. So I start getting on the phone. I'm like trying to find tickets. Can anybody get me tickets to a Blazer game in Oklahoma City? I know people affiliated with the team. I got friends who know players. I can't get jack poo-poo from anybody. I'm calling everybody I can think of. Then I call my friend Doug Crane, who's had season tickets in the lower bowl for over a decade. And I call up Doug and I said, Doug, I'm desperate. I've been online. Tickets are like $150 a piece. I got to get tickets to this game. I want to take my nephew. Doug Crane says, well, that's weird. Because last night, I was at a cocktail party. And a man walked up to me and said, hello, my name is Chris McGowan. I'm the president of the Portland Trail Blazers. Here's my card. You ever need anything, call me. And I said, Doug, I need something. He says, I'll call him. Gets on the phone, calls me back 3 minutes later, talk to Doug McGowan's assistant. They're going to take care of you. Don't worry about it. My work here is done. I gave him your phone number. Goodbye. I fly to Oklahoma City. I'm waiting for the phone call. Game's on Sunday evening. Sunday at noon, I haven't heard a word. Then my phone rings. Hi, it's such and such from the Portland Trail Blazers. Is this Tony Kriz? Yes, it is. We understand that your nephew is sick. Yes, he is. And you want to take his brother to a game? Yes, I do. We're going to take care of you. Is your nephew a big Portland Trail Blazer fan? I said, it was one of those moments I didn't want to be a Jesus person, but I told the truth. I said, I'm sorry, no, he's a Thunder fan. The guy on the other line goes, ooh. That's a little more complicated, but we're going to take care of you. Phone rings again, half an hour later, goes, got you taken care of. Show up to the stadium 2 hours early, coming through the press entrance on the south side. Someone will be there waiting for you. So I load up my nephew Athen in the car. We drive into Oklahoma City. We go down, get great parking 2 hours early. Go around to the press entrance, walk to the press entrance, and there's a man literally standing there, 6'8" in a three-piece suit, waiting for my nephew to walk through the door. He walks in, and this man treats him like he is British royalty. Hello, Mr. Hardesty. We're so glad you're here. We've all been waiting for you. We've prepared a wonderful evening for you to enjoy what's going on. Would you like a tour of the entire stadium? My nephew, who's a fairly nervous, quiet kid, said, yes, please. We got to go and see all the back hallways nobody gets to see. We got to see all the places only the players get to go. We got to walk around. He got to play one-on-one basketball against the mascot of the Thunder. And then, an hour before the game, he leads us down onto the actual basketball court while all the players from both teams are playing. And we got to stand on the court, hang out, while they would bring NBA player after NBA player over to us to sit down and talk to my nephew and treat him like he was British royalty. And about 15 minutes before the game started, they came, they got us, they took us to seats in about the 15th row. We sat and watched the game. A guy hit a half-court shot at halftime to win a Toyota. The Thunder won. And after the game, my nephew got to go on the court and play basketball where the Thunder play. It was probably 10:30 at night, 11 o'clock at night when I got him home. We went inside and he was so excited. Tell his parents all about the experience, every detail, every color, every smell. They had given him a whole bag of gifts, 3 of each, one for him and one for each of his brothers. Showed every piece to his parents. And then exhausted and in bliss, this little boy goes to bed. And so did I. And 20 minutes later, my sister wakes me hysterical. She doesn't know if her youngest son is alive or dead. She's scared to touch him. She says, you have to go. You have to go see if he's alive. For me. And I go in his room, and sure enough, that little boy is dead after fighting cancer for 1.5 years. 4 years old. And I remember sitting in that house that night, trying to hold these two realities simultaneously. This magical evening with Athen and the death of Ransom. The joy of a boy and the pain of my sister, both raging simultaneously on my soul. And how do we emotionally survive in a world where incongruent realities like these exist in the same space? Where our lives have to hold glory and pain at the same time. How do we survive? Okay. Hello? I want to try something. I want you, for a few minutes, to not look at me. I want you to look at each other. So those of you in the front, you just sort of turn around and look at the back of the room. Those on the sides, turn sideways and look this way. Turn sideways, look this way. Those in the back, once again, you're lucky. You get to sit in the back. You don't have to turn at all because you already look at everybody. The joy of being the back row gang. Okay. What I'd like to do is I'd like to read a series of sentences, a series of statements. If the statement is true of you, I want you to just raise your hand. Got me? Statement's true of you. I just want you to raise your hand, and I want you to hold it up for a second until I say thank you. Does that make sense? Yes? Read a statement, true of you, raise your hand. Now, if I read a sentence, a statement, and it's true of you, but you don't want to share that with this particular group of people, which is reasonable, then don't raise your hand. You are not lying if it's true and you don't raise your hand. You're just choosing to not share that detail of your life right here, right now. It's your choice when you share your story with other people. Does that make sense? It's your call. But I would also encourage you to risk. Okay? So let's try this. I am nervous about this year at Multnomah. Hold your hands up, leave them up. Look at one another. Turn around, look at one another. People are giving you their story. Value them, that they would share something about themselves. Thank you. I expect this year at Multnomah to be amazing, maybe my best year ever. Keep your hands up. Look around. Rich, leave your hand up. Thank you. Man, it's always the adults. I feel emotionally out of control. Leave them up. Acknowledge each other. Thank you. I feel emotionally healthy. Thank you. My faith gives me certainty. Thank you. My faith leaves me confused. Look around. Thank you. I hate religion. Thank you. I love religion. Look around. Thank you. I feel hard-hearted. Thank you. I feel tender-hearted. Thank you. I feel self-addicted. Thank you. I feel others-centered. Thank you. I feel spiritually broken inside. Thank you. I feel spiritually healed inside. Thank you. My losses and failure are a great pain in my life. Thank you. My losses and failure are a great gift in my life. Thank you. I feel lost. Thank you. I feel found. Thank you. I just finished writing a novel, and I went into Kinko's to get it printed because I wanted to see it all on actual pieces of paper instead of just on my screen. It's early in the morning, and I remember I was standing, hey Derek, I was standing and I'm standing in line. There's only one other person in the Kinko's, this regal, older African-American woman. She's standing in line, and she turns to chat with me for a second. She asks what I'm doing. I tell her I'm putting my book. She's like, wow, that's great. What's the book about? I said, well, it's a novel, but it's really about someone trying to find God, because that's the most important thing to me. And this old woman begins to cry in the Kinko's. Beautiful woman. And when she finally collects herself, she looks at me and she says, I'm sorry. It's just been so long since I've seen a young person who still wants to know God. One of my favorite stories in the Bible comes from the end of John's Gospel. I love John for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I love John is because he can write. I hate to say this, but from a literature standpoint, many of the biblical writers are under-talented. I mean, it's not saying it's not true, and it's not really important, and we should read every page of our Bible. I'm not saying that. But Peter's a good dude. He just can't write. And Paul would not be a bestseller in the 21st century. He just wouldn't be. But John can straight write. And at the end of John's gospel, this is a story. After Jesus has died and risen again, there's this story that John, this incredibly talented writer, who has an ability to weave philosophy and metaphor, poetry and story together in this really, really beautiful way. At the climax of his book, just after the most important scene in the book, which for John, interestingly enough, isn't even Jesus' resurrection, but it's that Jesus in his resurrection chose to appear to a woman named Mary first in a garden. And it says that Mary was so overwhelmed that she embraced him, fulfilling the promise from John chapter 1. For Jesus came unto his own, but his own did not receive him. She embraces him in John 20, fulfilling the symmetry of the book. And then just after this scene where she embraces Jesus, and just before the lines where John says, I write these things, you might know that Jesus is Christ through him of life in his name, in that little space in between the two, John chooses to put this awkward little story, a story about a fellow named Thomas, a story I've known my entire life, a Sunday school story that my Sunday school teachers used to love to tell me as a cautionary tale. Because Thomas was the 11th disciple. You know what I mean? Judas was the 12th, right? They were a basketball team. He'd be the guy who gets water, takes stats. And poor Thomas, because he's the doubter, he sits on the end of the bench and doesn't really get playing time, not like Peter, James, and John and the others. Poor Thomas. And in the scene in John chapter 20, interestingly enough, even though the story's about Thomas, Thomas is not in the scene. So when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." And when he had said this, he showed them both his hands and his side. The disciples then rejoiced, for they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, I also send you." And when he said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." It's this exciting scene. It says the disciples were present. Jesus came magically in their presence, slipped through the door in this magical way, showed up, risen from the dead. Unbelievable. But John makes it very clear, verse 24, but Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. Disciples present, Thomas not. The other disciples were saying to Thomas, "We have seen the Lord." And Thomas said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the imprint of the nails, and put my finger in the place of the nails, and put my hand in his side, I will not believe." Here's the deal. This story is about Thomas. It's clearly about Thomas. John goes out of his way to tell us the stories about Thomas. Jesus showed up to everybody but Thomas. And then Thomas says, "Unless I root my hands around inside the wounds of his walking corpse, I will not believe." These are not the words of a sane man. These are the words of someone insane. These are the words of someone mad. And his madness is reasonable because Thomas is alive. And he's trying to hold incongruent realities together, and they're driving him mad. The hope of the world, the kingdom of God, is coming and among us. And the empire of the deranged and the mad and the racist have destroyed it on the cross. My best friend I've ever known in my life, the person who's loved me more than anyone else, who called me and cared for me, is gone. And not only is he gone, but when he rose from the dead, he chose to appear to everybody but me and left me out. Maybe he didn't love me at all. I thought I knew why I was alive, and I thought I knew why I was living, and I thought I knew what I would live for, and now I have no idea why I'm alive, what I will live for, or what I will do. And he was trying to hold these incongruent realities together simultaneously in the room, and he feels alone. And because the story is about Thomas, it goes on to say that after 8 days, the disciples were again inside, Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Reach here with your finger and see my hands. Reach here your hand, put it in my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believing." On my honeymoon, awkward segue. On my honeymoon, my wife and I, my parents gave us round-trip tickets to Europe. We were totally broke. So I said, "Dad, fly us into Stockholm, fly us out of Budapest 5 weeks later, and with a couple $100 in our pocket, we saw Europe." We hitched and slept on park benches, slept one night in a movie theater, slept on boats in 2 different seas. Found our way through 13 countries, saw some of the great museums of the world. And she was never out of my sight for 5 weeks. I recommend it. I had friends with a flat just outside of Florence who let us stay there, so we got to spend about 5 days in Florence. I got to go to the museums of Florence, and we went to the Uffizi one day, and the Uffizi is supposed to be a magnificent museum, but it was like our 6th or 7th, and I was tired of Florentine art. So we were hustling through because I was hungry and I wanted salami. And in the last room of the Uffizi Museum, turned the corner, and there in front of me was one of those paintings that takes your breath and knocks your knees out from under you. It was Caravaggio's Thomas the Apostle. And I remember that I felt for the bench because I couldn't take my eyes off the painting, and I sat down, and for the next 90 minutes I didn't take my eyes off of it, sketching and looking. In the painting, it's this moment. In the painting, Jesus is there, standing off to one side, his beautiful body exposed, the wounds exposed, his face full of love. And he has his hand wrapped around Thomas's forearm, and the ripples of his carpenter forearm are visible. And he's pulling Thomas towards him, all love. But he's pulling Thomas towards him. Thomas is over here going, I don't know if I want this. Despite my madness, I don't know if I want this. And Jesus has pulled Thomas so far that his fingers are rooted up inside the wound in Jesus' side. And they're still as Jesus is pulling Thomas towards him. Bring me your madness. Invade me. I am not afraid of your chaos. I'm not afraid of these incongruencies that you fight with and try and hold on to. You know what Jesus doesn't do in this scene? Jesus doesn't promise Thomas it's going to be okay. Doesn't promise it's going to be easy. It's all going to work out. Don't worry, Thomas, I'm bringing a bow to put on this present. Don't worry, Thomas, from this day forward. All Jesus says is, I have space for your madness. Root your fingers inside my wounds, and do not be unbelieving, but believing. In the midst of your chaos and doubt and loneliness, invade me. This is not Tony Robbins. This is Jesus Christ. I am nervous about this next year, and I expect this next year to be possibly my greatest ever. I feel emotionally out of control, and I feel emotionally healthy. My faith gives me certainty, and my faith leaves me confused. I hate religion, and I love religion. I feel hard-hearted and tender-hearted. I feel self-addicted and other-centered. I feel spiritually broken and spiritually healed. My losses and failures are a great pain and the greatest gift of my life. I feel lost. I feel found. One day I was at the beach on an academic retreat. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. It was winter. The sun hadn't come up yet. It's probably 6:45. And I was walking down this road, and I was walking over a bridge. I could hear the ocean in the distance. The bridge was maybe 200 feet long. The morning mist was still over, covering. I couldn't see the end of the bridge. A little bit of light from street lights, but not much. And I'm walking through the darkness across this bridge. As I'm walking, staring at the fog, when I hit about the halfway point of the bridge, the fog comes to life. The fog begins to move. It begins to change color. It goes from grays and whites to blacks and browns and starts to move towards me. I was so confused by what I was seeing that I was walking towards it in the darkness when the first set of antlers came through the fog bank, and an elk taller than me was walking towards me, antlers bared. Two more bulls came on either side and walked towards me, antlers bared, and I froze. And the fog receded, and 50 more elk stood behind those three, blocking the way, 20, 25 feet in front of me. And the scene was so otherworldly that I couldn't help but to take steps towards it because I knew it was too far to run back. And as I began to step, the antlers came lower. I was stuck. Too high to jump, too far to run. Stuck. And the lead bull, I'm not making this up, takes a step towards me and another step, and I'm frozen. And then turns 90 degrees and leaps over the railing. 25-foot drop. Lands, and 50 elk follow over the railing. And though I ran to look, and I couldn't see them because of the mist, but I could hear them for 3 minutes running towards the ocean through the river valley. This is a magical story for me. It's a true story. It's a story I kept hidden inside. I didn't tell people because I thought it was some sort of gift from God that was just for me. There's a Native American man who adopted me about 10 years ago as his nephew. And then he died about 3 years ago. But a couple months ago, my Uncle Richard spoke to me from the grave about this scene, about this story. And what I heard my uncle say was that I didn't understand the story. It was not a magical story. It was not a mystical story. It was not a supernatural story. It was an everyday story. And what Uncle Richard said to me, he says, there's nothing fundamentally different about that morning with the elk than the trees that are outside that window, or a colony of ants walking in a line, or a hawk circling in the sky. The only difference between those two things is that morning with the elk, I was awake to the beauty of God. And most days I live asleep, not awake, missing the beauty and the miracles going on all around me all the time. There are incongruent realities we all have to hold together. It's easier to do when we try and do it together. It's easier to do when we know we're not alone. And it's easier to do when we know the mystical God is at work at all times and all places, regardless of whether or not it makes sense. Just like Jesus said to Thomas, I'm not going to explain this to you. I'm not going to promise you it's going to be easy. You'll never go to a movie where the quarterback wins every game, wins the championship, gets the girl, and everything is fine. There's no such movie like that. You're never going to read a novel where two people meet when they're 14 years old. They never make any mistakes. They just love each other. They respect each other's bodies the entire time. They end up getting married. They have perfect children. They never have a fight. They retire and they fall asleep and die in each other's arms at the end of their life after 90 years. You'll never read a novel like that. There's no Broadway play about the hero who wins every battle. Because we don't even really want that. But sometimes it's hard to live the question. But when we do, this is an old Puritan prayer I'll finish with. Let me learn by paradox that the way down is the way up, that to be low is to be high, that the broken heart is the healed heart, that the contrite spirit is the rejoicing spirit, that the repenting soul is the victorious soul, that to have nothing is to possess all, that to bear the cross is to wear the crown, that to give is to receive, that the valley is the place of vision. Lord, in the daytime, stars can be seen from deepest wells, and the deeper the wells, the brighter the stars shine. Let me find thy light in the darkness, thy life in my death, thy joy in my sorrow, thy grace in my sin, thy riches in my poverty, thy glory in my valley. Love God, love others, live the question. The Lord bless you and keep you. Have a great week.